So I have two bits of housekeeping, two announcements to start the class with, and then we will talk close relationships. The first, I assume you heard on the loudspeaker about 5 minutes ago. Today's the safety drill, and at 11:30 there will be the earthquake drill. My plan is to finish class by 11:20 if I can, and then you will be free to go wherever you want to do the earthquake drill. If I lose track of time and we're still here when the earthquake drill happens, I apologize. Second bit of housekeeping, I received an email yesterday talking about the upcoming course evaluation survey that all of you would be asked to complete. And what I plan to do is next week take about the first 10 minutes of class for that. Now, what I have requested from them is that they send me the questions so you can look at the questions and think about what answers to give. I assume that I eventually get to see the class's responses with your names removed, so I don't know who said what. Back at my university in the United States, I always look forward to that because it helps me become a better teacher. And if you come to class next week and you open the survey and you just fill out the questions, not really having thought about it, then I might look at what the answers are and think, I wish I knew more. But if you see the questions in advance, I'm hoping that you can give me some really good answers that tell me where I could be better as a teacher. You're my first class of students that I'm teaching here in Japan, but I'm here for another term. In April, I'll be teaching a whole new set of classes, and I would like to get better, and you could really help me that way. So, those are the opening announcements. Let us talk close relationships. Something we like to say in the communication field is every time you talk to another human being, that conversation has two dimensions. There's the content dimension. You tell them what the meanings of your words and sentences are, but then there's also the relationship dimension. The way you communicate brings into existence and may sometimes strengthen the relationship you have with them. You and I have a relationship, professor and student. Now that is not categorized as a close relationship. There are three categories in the study of relational communication. Role relationships, R-O-L-E, kind of like you play a role in a play. If you were in Romeo and Juliet, you might be the nurse, and that was your role. Role relationships, people are replaceable. If you go to a restaurant and a server comes and takes your order, but while you're still there, that server, their shift is over and they go home, and another server comes and brings you your dessert, it's okay. One person could take your order, another person bring you your dessert. It doesn't make anything bad happen because those relationships, there is a relationship, but it's a role relationship. It doesn't matter who's in it. The second category is an interpersonal relationship. An interpersonal relationship, and professor and student is an interpersonal relationship. Because if I didn't show up next week and they had someone else take over the class, you would notice the difference. The class would be different. But the third category is the close relationship. And the difference between a close relationship and a role or interpersonal relationship, we use our close relationships to satisfy our emotional needs, especially our need for belonging, our need to belong, the need to feel that somebody else accepts us. If I don't show up next week and another professor replaces me, you might notice the difference, but I don't think any of you are using your relationship with me to meet your emotional needs. So, what we will talk about today is where nonverbal communication, how it's been studied in connection with primarily romantic relationships, dating and marriage, but also, to a more limited degree, immediate family relationships, parents, children, sisters, brothers, and also best friend relationships, closest friend, because those also are categorized as close relationships. We use them to meet emotional needs. You might remember a few weeks ago when we were talking about gestures and movement, I showed you this as we were talking about posture. And I made the point that leaning forward shows something called nonverbal immediacy, and leaning backward shows the opposite. Leaning forward, when you have conversation, is a nonverbal that shows that you feel psychologically close to the other person or people in the conversation. Leaning back shows that you are withdrawing, that you are not psychologically close to them. At that time, I promised that that was not the only immediacy cue we were going to talk about. 2 weeks ago, or 2 class meetings ago, it was more weeks ago than that, but 2 class meetings ago when we talked about interaction and we talked about eye contact behavior, we said that when you don't make eye contact, that's a non-immediacy cue. It shows psychological distance. So far we're up to 2. Leaning forward, leaning back, making eye contact, not making eye contact. What I want to do right now is give you the rest of the immediacy cues that come out of research. When you deliver these cues, and they're all visible, when you deliver them to another person, each of them, we've shown collecting data in experimental setups, primarily with Western participants in the United States, it signals psychological closeness. Before I show you the first one, let me jump in and say there have been some studies done of what do immediacy cues do in environments where Japanese people are communicating with other Japanese people. And what they have found is the cues themselves send the same messages, but that Japanese people report that they use them less often. The evidence, the data show that Japanese women use immediacy cues more than men do, but that Japanese women use them less than American women, and Japanese men much less than American men. That's consistent with how we categorize cultures. Japan is categorized as a neutral culture when it comes to emotional displays. The United States is classified as moderately affective, which is to say, when we feel an emotion, we show it. Not as affective as, say, Spain, Italy, or Greece, which are highly affective. They show everything. But Japan is at the other end of the spectrum and doesn't show much. And that would explain, or would be consistent with, Japanese people reporting they don't use immediacy cues very often. But they do recognize them. The first one, the one that a week ago we found the easiest emotional expression to recognize. Smiling is an immediacy cue. You will not be surprised to hear when you smile at a person, it sends a message of psychological closeness. The second one, the second immediacy cue, is open posture. Open posture. Now, I used this picture the same day I used the leaning forward and leaning back to show inclusive posture. That if these 3 people were out in public and talking and they were standing like this, they would be signaling that you were free to join the conversation. They're not facing each other. They haven't formed a circle with their backs to you. You're welcome to walk right up and join. Now, that's a little different from open posture. The two on the left are showing open posture. This young lady is a little bit not. And here I have to explain kind of carefully. I talked at the first class meeting about hogwash, about things people make up that are junk science. Here's one. When you stand like this, it's because you feel defensive, and you're putting up a barrier to protect yourself. No, it does not mean that. Not reliably, not at all. But an observer who sees you stand like this is likely to find you less approachable. It's not how you feel inside. This is not some clue to your emotions or your thoughts. But someone seeing you in that position may be less likely to approach you. An open posture, both of these ladies have nothing blocking their torso. That's a little bit of an immediacy cue. This young lady, because she is holding her drink and may have something on her arm, there's a little bit of an obstacle. So her posture is not quite as open. So the first was smile. The second was open posture. The third one is just for your notes to be complete because I'm building toward a memory trick. You've already seen this one. The forward lean. The forward lean is an immediacy cue. And I've said everything that needs saying about that one, so I'm going to jump on and say the fourth immediacy cue is touch. And I always have to be careful to say touch is an immediacy cue when it is appropriate. Inappropriate touch, unwelcome touch, is not necessarily an immediacy cue. But you touch people typically in a way that shows affinity, it shows approach, it shows that you feel some kind of connection with them, you want to comfort them, you want to reassure them. Those are the messages touch typically sends. The fifth immediacy cue is like forward lean. I'm doing it to make your notes complete because I have something in mind. But you've seen it before. It's eye contact. Making eye contact is an immediacy cue. Withholding eye contact is a non-immediacy cue. If someone's there and you don't make eye contact with them, you're showing you don't feel psychological closeness with them. We don't tend to make eye contact with strangers in public places, on the train, in restaurants, places like that, because it's intrusive. They're a stranger and you're being polite, so you don't make eye contact. The sixth, I think it's sixth, I may have lost count, nodding. And this is an immediacy cue more commonly used by Japanese people than by people from the United States. And one that a lot of Americans over the years have gotten confused by. I talked about this when we talked about gestures. This is commonly misinterpreted as meaning agreement, when all it really means is, I'm listening, and I understand what you say. I may think you're wrong, but I'll nod as long as I'm listening and understand what you say. The last of the major immediacy cues is space, comma, use of. Use of space. We talked previously about interpersonal distance. And this was the visual I used for personal space. Now there's intimate space. Your lover, your family members, and small children come into the intimate space, the closest ring. This is the second ring, which is how close you get to have a conversation with someone you know very well. And when you approach like that, that's an immediacy cue. I believe I used this example before, but I'll do it one more time. Teachers, education majors who are training to be teachers are taught, if a student asks a question while you're teaching class, a good thing to do is just walk toward the student in answering, because that's an immediacy cue, and it shows them you welcome the question. So why is that phrased so strangely, space use of? And why did I include forward lean and eye contact? Because all the years I've taught this to my students in the United States, they have benefited from a memory trick. Now, it's an English word. If you want to use this English word, the T is silent. It's not softens, it's softens. And it just means making something soft. Putting lotion on your hands or putting fabric softener in when you wash your clothes. And I'm sure your notes will reflect this, but it is smile, open posture, forward lean, touch, eye contact, nodding, and space use of. I don't know how useful it'll be to you, but when I teach this material to my American students, they tell me this helps them a lot, and they quote it. I have former students come back years later, and they'll still say, I used all the softens cues, and they helped. So that's something I promised you many weeks ago, that we would talk through the cues that show immediacy. Where we are going from there is to a theoretical framework from a researcher named Peter Anderson at San Diego State University that explains what is the effect of nonverbal immediacy cues. He named his theory, like an academic, he gave it long words for the name that I think are not necessary, but if you want to look up research on it, this is the name of the theory: cognitive valence theory. Cognitive just meaning thinking. Valence just meaning positive or negative. Previously, when we talked about expectancy violation theory, we talked about violation valence and communicator reward valence. This just means if you show an immediacy cue to another person, what is the likelihood that they'll respond positively? Will they, as they interpret it, will they say that that immediacy cue from you had a positive valence, they like it, or a negative valence, it made them uncomfortable? The first part of the model is pretty simple. When you show an immediacy cue to another person, it will cause a certain level of arousal, physical arousal. And that might be low, moderate, or high. If the cue you show them causes only low arousal, then probably it will have no effect on them. We've said before, approaching someone is an immediacy cue. Well, I ride 3 different trains to get here, which means on 3 separate occasions I come up very close to a complete stranger, but it causes low arousal. Because when you're on the train, that just happens. Lots of people come close to you. One thing Anderson's research showed is, if your immediacy cues are causing such low arousal that they have no effect, the best thing to do is use multiple channels. So maybe you want to walk up close to someone and make eye contact and smile. 3 channels. If you do that, the odds that the arousal will move from low to moderate, that likelihood is pretty good. Probably they'll experience moderate arousal. Now there's a danger, they may experience high arousal. If you throw so many immediacy cues at them that they experience high arousal, almost always, says this theory, they will interpret it negatively. It's too much. So if you walk right up to them, smile, make eye contact, touch them, nod, do all of it at once, whoa, too much. Don't do that. If you can get in the middle, though, if you get into moderate arousal, that's where this model acquires a little bit of complexity. Peter Anderson said there are 6 filters, 6 cognitive valencers, and if all 6 of them are positive, even just a little bit, then probably they will respond well to your immediacy cue. But if even one of them is negative, they'll probably respond negatively. The first of them is culture. So when you send an immediacy cue to another person, if their culture taught them that that is inappropriate, that negatively valences it. So if you smile for no reason at someone from Russia, their culture will say, you're probably making fun of them, you're being rude. But if you smile for no reason at someone from Thailand, the land of 1,000 smiles, the culture says that's an appropriate thing to do. In the United States, smiling at a stranger for no reason is friendly. So that valencer for someone from the United States or Thailand is likely to be positive. From Russia, the culture valencer would likely make it negative. Not guaranteed, but the probability is pretty high. The second valencer is personality. I've already said before that introversion and extroversion are kind of easy ideas to misunderstand, and a lot of people want to self-diagnose themselves as introverts based on not enough evidence. But it is true, some people are comfortable with being approached very energetically by other people. It's just part of their personality, and it is stable over time. So if the person you are giving the immediacy cues to, if they love meeting people, they never meet a stranger, they find people wonderful, delightful, then that valencer is likely to tip positive. If, on the other hand, by personality, they're a little bit shy, they're a little bit reserved, and the kinds of cues you use them very gently. You approach a little bit, but not too close. You make some eye contact, but not too much. Their personality might valence that positively. The fact that you were gentle with them. The third valencer is partner reward. Partner reward. If you show someone immediacy cues and they can see right away there are things about you that they regard as positive. Maybe they've been in a class with you here at this university and they've seen that you're a very hard worker or that you have very nice, friendly manners. And they already have an impression that you have qualities that they like, and then you show them immediacy cues. That is another valencer that may tip it positive. On the other hand, if they see that you have characteristics that they don't value, maybe, whether it's fair or not, maybe they don't like athletes, and you're on a sports team here. So one of those athletes was staring at me today. That may tip it negative. Based on what they know of you, how rewarding do they think it would be to interact with you? The fourth valencer is the relationship they have with you. It may be that you are their neighbor. They live just a couple of doors down from you. And it may be that you come up and give them a hug. I don't know. And they don't mind being hugged by their friends, and they don't mind being hugged by their family. Being hugged by a neighbor is maybe a little too much. Their assessment of whether the immediacy cue belongs in the relationship at the current stage it's at is the fourth valencer. I think it's fourth. Did I count right? Because culture, personality, partner reward, relationship. Fifth one, the situation. Where are you and what's going on? Now, I used this as my visual for the situation because even though I could believe they could be a romantic partner, they're out in public. They're not holding hands. They're standing a little close together, but they might say, we're not going to use any immediacy cues with each other because we're in a public place. And depending on the culture and depending on people's upbringing, sometimes they're uncomfortable showing affection in a public place when other people can see. So if you show them an immediacy cue in a situation they don't think is appropriate, one immediacy cue, we mentioned touch. Friends will sometimes roughhouse a little bit. They'll punch one another playfully. They'll wrestle playfully. Well, if you did that with your friend at a funeral, they might think, not here, this is not the place. And that would be a situation as a cognitive valencer that might tip negative. The last one, Peter Anderson, the researcher, he just named it temporary states. And what he meant by that is, do they feel sick? Do they have a headache? Do they have the flu? Do they feel upset? Did they just get bad news? Are they overwhelmed with everything that they need to do? Are they very busy? Physical illness or mental burdens. If they've got a lot, and you come up and show them immediacy cues, they might respond negatively. Whereas on another day, when they're not sick, or when they're not burdened with a lot of things to think about, they might respond positively. Now, what you should notice about that, the first two valencers do not change much. Culture changes very slowly. People's personality, once they're past childhood, changes very little. The last two valencers change all the time. When you leave this room, you will change situation, and you'll probably change situation a dozen more times before the end of the day. Temporary states are called temporary states because they change. It's the two in the middle that are interesting from a communication standpoint, because partner reward may change as people learn more about one another. And the status of a relationship changes the longer people know one another and as people interact. So, the model says, if all six are positive, is there a bug attacking lots of people? Wow. It's an unwelcome immediacy cue. If all six are positive, then probably what they will do is they'll show you an immediacy cue back. They may smile back. If you gave them an affectionate touch, they may give you one back. But if one of those tips negative, then likely they're going to withdraw. And they will likely evaluate that encounter with you as a negative one. All right. So that brings us then, all of those are kind of the building blocks of talking about how nonverbals operate in close relationships. Now we can take a step back and start to talk about the bigger picture. There is a researcher from a long time ago, Robert Sternberg. He was a psychology professor at Yale, and he had a framework for talking about love. And he said love has got three components. He called them the hot one, the warm one, and the cool one. The hot one was passion, the extent to which the person with whom you are in the close relationship makes you aroused. Now, if it's a romantic relationship, that could include sexual arousal. But it also includes close family relationships. And if you wonder how arousal could be part of that, well, just let a mother think you are somehow attacking her child, and you see how upset she can get, and that is its own form of arousal. People tend to be similarly excited, upbeat, energetic when they know they get to spend time with their best friend. Their best friend energizes them. And that would fit in the idea that passion is part of that relationship. Now, intimacy, the idea is very simple. To what extent do you lower your defenses and make yourself open to someone in a close relationship that you wouldn't with other people? Do you tell them secrets? Do you behave sometimes not perfectly, knowing that they're your friend and they'll accept it? With married couples and also with family, being naked around one another is a form of intimacy. You don't need the defenses necessarily. Passion and intimacy are largely communicated non-verbally. Commitment is largely communicated verbally. Commitment, just very briefly. We're not going to talk much about it because there are not that many nonverbal signs of commitment. Commitment is just showing them you're not going to abandon them. If you are their spouse, you're not going to walk out on them. If you're their best friend, you're not going to grow apart. That's mostly done with verbal assurances. But passion and intimacy, you can say words that convey passion and say words that convey intimacy, but the nonverbals that show them are more powerful. So let's talk passion. And the research into nonverbal communication that most draws together how you can see passion operating in a close relationship, in this case a romantic relationship, is a model by a researcher named Albert Shefflin. Now, he's been dead for a while. He did this in the 1960s. But he had a model of the stages of quasi-courtship. Quasi-courtship. Now, courtship is going from meeting someone to becoming their romantic partner. Quasi or quasi, I've heard it pronounced both ways, just means sometimes you really are making a romantic partner. Sometimes you're just pretending to for specific purposes. And I will come back and explain the pretending part. If I forget, someone raise your hand and tell me you need to go back and explain quasi, because it's important. It's part of the model. So Albert Shefflin said, stage one, from the time you first meet someone that might become your romantic partner, is called attention. When we are looking for a romantic partner, the earliest stage is one where you try to get noticed. There is a person nearby who is attractive enough that they might make a good romantic partner. So, you want to be noticed by that person. Being in the attention stage, most people report it feels exciting, but it also feels dangerous because they might not be interested, they might reject you. So, what's observed in the attention stage is mixed displays of affect. Mixed displays of affect. You show that you're interested, but you also show you're interested in a lot of people and a lot of things in the room. It's very common, if you see someone who's attractive, to look directly at them multiple times. In a social gathering between people who are looking for a partner, if there's repeated direct eye contact, that means something is developing. I should stop here and mention Shefflin's research was all in the United States, and because of the way gender norms operate there, I believe I brought this up the day we talked about gesture and movement. Men take up a lot of space. That's one of the ways that you show that you are a very masculine man. In the attention stage, that's where you see it the most. That may involve dancing. That may involve playful roughhousing, but that happens, that's one of the ways that you try to get noticed. Another way, it's kind of an old-fashioned word, even for English speakers, primping. When you know that you're going out, you dress up, you groom yourself, that all happens before you go out. Primping happens throughout the evening or throughout the day. If someone very attractive is nearby, you might start straightening everything. You might, if you're wearing makeup, you might touch it up, make sure it's perfect. All of that is primping. That behavior commonly happens in the attention stage. The chief thing you're trying to do is maximize your attractiveness just to get noticed. Okay. And I just realized something is a little out of order. So let me jump over this. You can see what the name of the stage is, recognition. And we'll come back to the slide that says recognition. But the last time we met, we talked about basic emotions. This was proposed in 2020 as a basic emotion. Can anyone guess what it is? There was another picture that was included in the publication of the study. Same emotion. What do you think? What do you think? Ooh, oh, I like that. She did something sneaky. She feels satisfied with herself. She did something sneaky and she got away with it. The researchers said that this is the universal expression for flirting. And in case that word doesn't translate, the best translation I could find, I don't think it's a great one, but a little bit of playfulness to try to get the other person to react and notice you in the context of you want them to think that you're attractive. And if you want to know, just in case you ever want to flirt in the United States, they gave instructions on how to make this facial expression. You look down, you turn your head, and then you make eye contact. I am currently flirting with all of you. Now, I don't know. This picture, when shown to the participants in the study, almost 80% of them said she's flirting. This picture, 70% when they saw this said she's flirting. And then they had other pictures they had included that a much smaller segment recognized as flirting. Now, we talked last week, the participants were offered this picture and then 4 possible emotions. She's angry, she's disgusted, she's afraid, she's flirting, and they picked flirting. So it was forced choice, which makes me a little bit skeptical. But I look at that and I think, okay, maybe that is a picture of flirting. I tell you all of that because flirting is what goes on between stage 1 and stage 2, which is recognition. In stage 2 of courtship, now you want to find out, are they interested? In the attention stage, you want to get noticed. In the recognition stage, you want to see, is this going to go anywhere? Now that they've noticed me, are they attracted to me? Now, in the United States, and more broadly in the West, women watch for signs that the man is not attracted, and that's the only thing they pay attention to. Men do the opposite. Men look for any sign that she is attracted, and that's the only thing they pay attention to. If she smiles, if she makes eye contact back, they're likely to interpret it as, she's attracted to me. There was a wonderfully funny study done in the 1970s. Somewhere on my hard drive in the United States, I have a copy of it. A research assistant was trained when the participants came in for the experiment to touch them on the hand, on the arm, on the upper arm, and either pat or rub or squeeze. And then they asked the participants what message was sent. And the women would go on for a long time. Well, it was the kind of thing where they're encouraging you because you're scared, but they're also saying they're your friend, and very detailed explanations. And I should mention here, that research assistant who was trained was a woman. Just about every man who participated in the study had one answer. She wants me. That was their only interpretation. If she touched them, didn't matter how she touched or where, she wants me. So, in the attention stage, women pay attention to rejection possibility. Men pay attention to anything that signals acceptance. What both sides tend to do when they reach this stage, if you have tried to get an attractive person's attention, and now you're at the recognition stage, you'll continue to show immediacy cues, but they will be mild ones, and they'll be cues that you can back off from. If they show a sign that they're really disgusted, then you want to get out of there without being embarrassed. So you want to be able to say, oh, I wasn't looking at you, I was looking at that person over there. Oh, I wasn't smiling at you, I remembered something funny. You want an alternate explanation just in case they're not at all interested. The final thing to say, this is true of the West, it's far more common that men approach. It's far more common that men will send the immediacy cue and start this stage. Women do sometimes, but men do it more often. Women do more of what we call gatekeeping. Gatekeeping. They are the ones who are likely to answer and either show that they are attracted or show that they're not and put a stop to it. All right. Back through the slides about flirting we go to talk about stage 3. If in the recognition stage the person who received the immediacy cues is attracted, then the next stage is positioning. Positioning. That is when the two people will shut out other people. So I showed you a little while ago the 3 ladies standing together, and they had inclusive posture. You could walk up and join that conversation. You see 2 people like this, don't walk up and try to join the conversation. They are at this point interacting with each other, and you are not invited. That's what happens in the positioning stage. They're more likely to make very direct eye contact. They're a lot more likely to lower their voices. Back when we talked about personal space, we said the closer people are, the more nonverbal cues that are very subtle you can pick up. You can pick up muscle tone, you can pick up smell, and you can also talk very quietly and hear one another, and that begins happening in this stage. Earlier I said in the attention stage, men take up a lot of space. Not in this stage. This is the stage where men pull in and they stop showing off so much. We've talked in previous weeks about turn taking, turn requesting, turn maintaining, that whole model. When they get to this stage, their conversation tends to go a lot more smoothly. In the earlier stages, they may accidentally interrupt each other. But when they're only paying attention to each other, they hand off the turns very, very adeptly as if they've known each other for a long time. By this point, they tend to be more committed to this interaction. So a few minutes ago I said that in the recognition stage, you don't want to be embarrassed. So you try to use immediacy cues that if they're not interested, you could back away from. By this stage, that's less true. You're more likely to come right out and show closeness with this person. Now, if this stage goes well, if nothing happens to ruin it, stage 4, sexual arousal. You present yourself to the partner in a way that is meant to arouse them. Most common is touch, and touch that is unmistakably intimate touch. So not playful punching or roughhousing, don't rumple their hair affectionately, hugs, arms around them. That's also the stage where there may be openly provocative behavior. Dancing may become very suggestive. Then what I should say, if that stage goes well, I promised you before that I was going to explain quasi. Everything up to this point, people sometimes do for a purpose other than finding a romantic partner. Sometimes they do it. I mentioned the word flirting. There are people who call flirting their hobby, and they do it with everybody. Sometimes you go through all these stages because there's something you want someone to do, and you persuade them. You manipulate them by turning on your attractiveness and treating them as though you were attracted to them. Now that's, I don't think, appropriate. I think that's an awful way to behave, but it's very well documented and not that unusual. So Shefflin included it in his model and called it quasi-courtship behavior. The person behaving that way is not really looking for a romantic partner, but they're going through the stages as though they were to try to get what they want. The last stage is resolution. And in Shefflin's model, the final stage of courtship is the two people engage in sexual contact, all the way to resolution of the encounter. And I do not have a visual for this. There is an old joke in early 20th century movies that movie makers would sometimes show people going through all the courtship stages and then show a train going into a tunnel. And that was the way they said, and they ended up having sex. But that's what the model shows. All right, that ends our discussion of passion and brings us to the discussion of intimacy. The first encounter, the growing encounter of being attracted to another person, is where passion may first be observable. And people who stay together as romantic partners might hold on to that passion. They might renew that passion. But what goes on between the passionate encounters is the intimacy. And here is what we know from nonverbal communication research into intimacy. The most easily observed and explained nonverbal signs of intimacy are what we call tie signs. Tie signs. The classic tie signs are all touch. They are the kinds of touch that when you engage in that kind of touch with another person, it shows everybody else. This is my girlfriend. This is my boyfriend. We are exclusive. We belong to each other. All of you are on notice. Leave this one alone. And if you see, typically, young woman and a young man holding one another like that, or arms around one another, or holding hands while walking, you might conclude those are not just classmates in a class. Those are not just teammates on a sports team. That's a romantic partnering. Something else that shows up as a tie sign is what we would call mutual grooming. Mutual grooming. I don't know if this happens in Japan. I observe it occasionally in the United States. You might see women do it to men more than men do it to women. She might see that he's got a loose thread on his clothes, so she picks it off. If another woman not in that partnership noticed that, well, he still looks sloppy with the loose thread, but if she comes up and picks it off, that's very not okay. That other woman had better tell the girlfriend, oh, your boyfriend or Bob or whatever his name is, there's something on his shirt, and the girlfriend will go and pick it off. Because grooming someone is a tie sign. It's something that, if they're in an exclusive relationship, their partner has the right to do it. That tie sign also shows up a lot between parents and children. Parents, moms mostly, but dads do it sometimes, will groom their children when in public. Adjust their clothing, smooth out their hair. In the United States, it would not be a good idea to do that to someone else's child, but you could do it to your own. Some of the other nonverbal signs of intimacy. There is the change in voice. The change in voice. And what's interesting about this, women, when talking to their romantic partner, will play into their gender. Their voice will go up in sweetness, in musical quality. It'll get softer. Men, when talking to their romantic partner, play against gender. Their voice gets softer, takes on a more gentle quality. This is something the data shows, but it's also something that I remember from my college days and a little beyond, when we had a friend who had a new girlfriend, and we would hear him on the phone with her, we would tease him because he would talk to us like this, and then the phone would ring and, oh, hey, honey. Just this huge change in their voice, and that voice was only for the romantic partner. People in a close relationship tend to change their voice a little bit when talking to that person. You can observe it with parents and grandparents especially talking to grandchildren. They'll talk to the next door neighbor, they'll talk to whoever's delivering the mail, and then here comes their grandchild, and their voice changes. The third category of nonverbal that conveys intimacy is one we haven't talked about since the second week of class when we talked about the channels, and that is chronemics. Chronemics, which is the academic name for communicating by use of time. We use time very differently with people with whom we are in a close relationship. We tend to be on time. We tend to show up on time to meet face-to-face. We tend to answer text messages, WhatsApp messages, more quickly. And how quickly you answer them is a way of showing the other person what a priority they are to you. And there are couples who fight over the fact that one or the other does not answer quickly enough. There's also the total volume of time spent together. If you're in a close relationship and you don't do enough things where the two of you are together for extended periods of time, then one or both of you might perceive that that relationship is not as important. In the United States, the divorce rate is at about 50%, and often one parent will have primary custody of the children, and the children will live with one parent most of the time. Commonly, the other parent will then try to arrange activities where that parent and the children spend a lot of time together. They'll go on vacation, they'll go camping, they'll develop a hobby, and what the parent is hoping is the time spent together shows the child, you're important to me. I took time away from my job, I took time away from other things I do, and I'm giving it to you, and you are important to me. Friends, it's a huge issue in the United States with people graduating college. You make very powerful friendships in college, and then after college, a lot of those friendships just fade out. But the ones that keep on going tend to be the ones where the friends wind up in the same city, same neighborhood, and they can make arrangements to spend a lot of time together. The third and final way we spend time to show intimacy is what we would call in the intercultural literature monochronic. Monochronic. And that means maybe you don't spend as much total time together, maybe you don't spend a whole day with them, but you set aside time when you're only with them and you're not doing anything else. You get together with them and the two of you just talk and get caught up. Sometimes very close friends might have the option. I can get together with my friend for 1 hour and we can have each other to ourselves for 1 hour, or we could spend all of Saturday, the two of us and 5 other friends. And that wouldn't be monochronic. Sometimes people get to feeling neglected if they never have the person in their close relationship all to themselves. This shows up sometimes in family counseling. Parents that have several children. Sometimes one child feels neglected and says, I just wish I could have one parent or both parents all to myself just for one afternoon. So the way we configure our use of time is a way that we can convey intimacy. Okay, tie signs, voice, chronemics are the major building blocks of conveying intimacy through nonverbals. That brings us then to 2 more topics in nonverbal communication research, where by observing someone's nonverbals, you can say a lot about the quality of their close relationships. One of them is the area of attachment styles. Attachment styles. Now, for a long time, this was something mostly only academics knew about. And I would introduce it to my students, and they would say, wow, never knew about this. These days, they talk to each other about it a lot before they ever make it to my class. So, this might be familiar to some of you. I'll give you the short introduction to it. We are fairly sure that the relationship you have with your first caregiver, it establishes a pattern, and for the rest of your life, the connections you have with other people is that pattern that first year of your life created. Some people, when they're babies, the relationship they have with their parents, or it might be grandparents, or if they grew up in an orphanage, it might be the people running the orphanage. The experience they had in that first year, it puts them into one of 4 categories. Now, we're going to go through the 4 categories, and I'm going to tell you what nonverbals are associated with each. But, to understand what they are, there are 2 ways you can think of them. There's how you think of yourself and how you think of other people, broadly. Not in one specific encounter, but broadly. You might think, I am a likable person who other people will like, or you might think, I'm not a likable person, people tend to reject me. You might think, other people are fun and likable and I want to be around them, or you might think, other people are not enjoyable to be around and I don't want to be around them. So 2 possibilities for each of those, you wind up with 4 combinations, and there are 4 attachment styles. The other way you can categorize it is the drive to approach people or the drive to avoid people. How are they balanced? Now, with that as the opening explanation, let us talk about the secure attachment style. The secure attachment style is what babies tend to wind up with if, most of the time, the parents, their caregivers, gave them what they needed in the right amount. Comforted them when they were upset, changed their diapers, fed them, played with them some of the time, but also let them have some time to play on their own. If that first caregiver got it right most of the time, they wind up with a secure attachment style. Here I should say, 70% of the population have a secure attachment style. So if this is making you scared that someday if you have children you might mess them up, most people don't. The other 3 attachment styles are about extremes. Now, someone with a secure attachment style tends to think, implicitly, not consciously, but they think, I am a likable person and other people are likable. So therefore, I will approach other people, but I'm also okay avoiding other people. My approach and avoidance drives are balanced. And I'm okay and they're okay, so an encounter with other people will probably be positive. Now, what nonverbals are associated with that? People with a secure attachment style, mostly when they're in public and around other people, tend to, with their face and their voice, show positive emotion. Smiles, laughter, pleasantness. Their emotional expression tends to be direct, and it tends to be pro-social. They will use their emotional expression to help other people. So if someone else is sad, they may mirror the sadness. If someone else is frustrated and talking out their frustration, someone with a secure attachment style may display frustration to agree with that person and help comfort them. Those are the kinds of nonverbals you see from people with a secure attachment style. My guess is most of the people you've been around in your life have that pattern, so there's not a lot to say about it. The second attachment style is the preoccupied attachment style. Preoccupied. This, we think, is what happens when babies sometimes were very well taken care of and then other times not taken care of at all. And it was a roller coaster and it was completely unpredictable. People with a preoccupied attachment style tend to have a positive view of other people. Other people are fun and desirable to interact with, but I am not. And people with a preoccupied attachment style tend to be afraid that other people are always about to abandon them. They therefore have a very powerful approach drive, almost terrified, and almost no avoidance drive. They always want closeness to other people. They try too hard. They have a desperation about them. The nonverbals, you will see, from people with a preoccupied attachment style, they don't control their emotional expression very well, and it's often very poorly timed. They will show an emotional cue at absolutely the wrong moment. When they have negative emotions, they're expressed aggressively, antisocially, in ways that embarrass or hurt other people, and they don't hold them back. But they also mix that with positive emotions. So they try very hard to be cheerful and fun, but there may be this hard to figure out mix of them also being angry and frustrated and complaining in ways that seem out of place. Not complaining about something that just happened, but complaining about things that always happen, and very negatively. The third and fourth attachment styles have some things in common. The third is fearful avoidance. Fearful avoidance. This one, and also the fourth one, we think are the product of a baby either not having their needs met at all, they were neglected, or their needs were met in a way that was uncomfortable, that was too much. It was aversive, and it made them turn away from interacting with the caregiver. One of those two. For whatever reason, they learned in that first year, interacting with other people is not rewarding. Now, the fearful avoidant, the model there, other people are not pleasant to interact with, and I am not a person other people will like or want to be around. I am not satisfied with myself, and I also do not enjoy interaction with other people. The nonverbals that are typical of fearful avoidance, very low levels of emotional expression, virtually never smile. They very carefully hide negative emotion, because negative emotion might bring on an interaction with another person that would be unpleasant. And you remember the turn-taking behaviors. They do a lot of turn denying. They don't want a turn in conversation. And if you try to draw them out and include them, they'll deflect it. The fourth and final of the attachment styles is dismissive avoidant. Dismissive avoidant. We're not really sure why some people become fearful avoidant and others become dismissive avoidant. But the model with dismissive avoidance, other people are not enjoyable or pleasant to deal with, but I am a good person and satisfied with myself. I will therefore spend most of my time interacting inside my own head with my thoughts, interests, and hobbies. I'll interact with other people when I have to, but I won't extend much effort to try to attract them. So what kinds of nonverbals do we see from that? Once again, low levels of expressiveness and very few smiles. But one Very clear difference between dismissive and fearful. Dismissive avoidant people in a conversation interrupt a lot and don't really try to take a turn. They'll withdraw if the conversation is not some way rewarding them, because you may simply not be worth it. In their case, they don't show negative emotions, but the fearful avoidant person tries to suppress, tries to hide the negative emotions. Dismissive people are less likely to feel negative emotions at all. They don't have a lot invested in other people. They therefore less frequently feel jealous, angry, anything of the kind. Now, one thing I would not recommend that you do, I would not recommend that you go around and try to diagnose other people or even yourself just based on observed nonverbals. These correlations show up in research. They're consistent enough that they are a piece of the puzzle. But I would only take your knowledge of this as one clue. Maybe there are other things you need to learn about the people in your life. But if you do find out things about their past, about their upbringing, you see patterns in how they interact with other people, the nonverbals might also help explain what's happening. Usually at this point, my students will ask, is it possible to change your attachment style? And the answer that the research gives us is sometimes. There are some relationships that tend to change someone's attachment style, sometimes for better, sometimes for worse. There are some people who seem by temperament to be able to change their attachment style, but not very often. Commonly, the pattern established in the first year of life is very stable. So you're not doomed to it, but if you wanted to change it, it would be a slow process, take a long time, and take a lot of work. All right, the final thing to talk about as far as nonverbal communication research and what it says about close relationships comes from the work of this man, John Gottman. I've mentioned a bunch of other researchers and not shown you their picture or put their name on the slide. John Gottman is a professor of marriage and family therapy at the University of Washington in the United States. In the field of communication, he is startling. He is kind of a standout. Some of the things he thinks are nonsense. If you go and read everything John Gottman's ever published, you'll read a lot of crazy things. But his research into what makes a marriage fall apart, he's taken his pre-registered criteria for a troubled marriage and applied them to married couples and predicted 7 years from now, will they be married or divorced? His accuracy is over 90%. He has pinned down, how can you tell the difference between a troubled and a healthy marriage? Now again, all in the United States. And marriage is different in different parts of the world and different cultures. But he simplifies that part of his research down to four behaviors that are troubling. If you see them, the marriage needs some concentrated work or it is going to fall apart. The first of them, and there will be associated nonverbals with them, which is why I'm including it in the class. The first of them is criticism. Now, how John Gottman defines criticism, he says, when you're unhappy with the person you're married to, and you accuse them, and you make the accusation universal. So if you say, you always do this, you always come home late, you always spend too much money, you always leave the house a mess. Or when he says that it's universal, if you say, you're nothing but a slob, you're nothing but a wasteful spender of money, that's just what you are. That's criticism, as he defines it. He says the alternative, and we're not going to go into a lot of detail, but he says, there's a constructive complaint where you just describe a behavior and how it makes you feel. When we run out of money at the end of the month, I feel upset because if we had enough money, I would have more peace of mind. If you put it that way, that's better for a relationship. But Gottman says, what shows up a lot with this behavior is an angry voice, an angry face, a lot of very direct, glaring eye contact, and angry gestures, a lot of pointing. If you find yourself doing that, then very likely you, with your romantic partner, are engaging in the first problem behavior. The second problem behavior is defensiveness. Defensiveness. When what your partner just said to you makes you want to fight back because you feel like you've been attacked, and once someone attacks you, you have to fight until you win. When that's your pattern of behavior, that's what defensiveness is. And Gottman says the alternative, even if your partner comes up to you and says you're just a slob and is furious, the healthy thing to do is to say, I can see you're upset. I can see what happened is upsetting you. The two of us have a problem we need to solve, which is not fighting back. It's taking the situation and thinking, how am I going to do something positive with this? But when people get defensive, the nonverbals, they tend to break eye contact a lot. Their voice tends to go way up in pitch. Why are you blaming me for this? I didn't do it. He describes it as whining, actually. There is cutting off conversation and what he calls pouting. A lot of negative facial expressions aimed at nobody, but so that everybody can tell that you're unhappy. You don't actually look at anybody, but you show that you're unhappy and hope that people will notice. And then finally, he says, associated with defensiveness, there's a lot of fake smiling. The smile to cover what you're really feeling. The third problem behavior, and he says this is the worst one of the four. He says where he sees this, he assumes that the marriage is headed for an end if they don't do something. Contempt. We mentioned it last week. It had been proposed as one of the basic emotions, although it was one of the ones for which the research is not very good. Contempt is the feeling the other person is beneath you, they're below you. They are such trash that they're not worthy of basic respect. And he said, people typically reach this point after criticism and defensiveness. And this is the one he said was most easily detected through nonverbals. There is the face of contempt, and I'm going to take my mask off and try to show you the face of contempt. Typically, there's a sneer. Your upper lip goes up a little. There's also commonly an eye roll. That I thought was a pretty good face of contempt. Along with it, there may be interrupting, because you don't treat someone with respect when you have contempt for them. So you interrupt a lot. There's laughing. And the particular kind of laughing, Gottman says often contempt is hidden under joking. And the person who's treating their partner with contempt will say, I'm just kidding, get a sense of humor. And Gottman's had to step in and say, no, you're not just kidding, you're treating them with contempt. The last one is stonewalling. After someone has treated you with contempt, there's very commonly a feeling that closeness has been broken. And stonewalling, he describes very easily. You remember all those 6 immediacy behaviors? You just don't show any of them. No eye contact, no smiling, you don't get close to each other. You just kind of pull back from them. All right, 11:24. And I have bulldozed rather quickly through a lot of information about nonverbals associated with close relationships. I still want to let you go to wherever you want to go for the earthquake drill. So I think what I'm going to say is if a question is just boiling up inside you right now, write it down. You could email it to me. We could start off class next week with a little question period about this. But what I want to do, I do it often at the end of class. Shuga anata o shukufukushi, anata o mamororemasu yoni. Shuga miko o anata ni terashi, anata o megumaremasu yoni. 主が御子をあなたに向け、あなたに平安を与えられますように。Go do the earthquake drill wherever you choose to do it, and I will see you next week.